Question 4, determine whether the outcome is a type 1 error, a type 2 error, or a correct decision. A test is made of null hypothesis, H sub 0. So let me rewrite that. H sub 0, population mean equals 7. Alternative hypothesis, population mean does not equal 7. Cool. So the true value of the population mean is 6, and the null hypothesis is not rejected. So when we're thinking of type 1 and type 2 errors, I like to draw this table here. I think you see the same table in your book, but I like to draw it. So on this table here, I have, let's say, HO rejected, null hypothesis not rejected. And up here we have the null hypothesis is true and the null hypothesis is false. What I also do to try to put this in kind of real terms, I use the idea of innocence versus guilt. So let's say we're on a jury and we can deal with an innocent defendant or a guilty defendant. And as a jury, our decision can be to convict or acquit. Okay? So the way I look at this is, if we convict a person who is innocent, we've made an error. In fact, we've made a type 1 error. And in statistical terms now, if we reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is actually true, we made a mistake, we made an error. If we reject the null hypothesis, but it turns out to be true, it's the type 1 error. If we can convict a guilty person, that's the correct decision, right? If we convict a guilty person, that's the correct decision. If we reject the null hypothesis when it's actually false, that's correct. If we acquit an innocent person, that's the correct decision as well. If we acquit someone who's innocent, good decision. In statistical terms, if the null hypothesis is not rejected, while the null hypothesis is true, that's the correct decision. To not reject that true null hypothesis is a good decision. But if we acquit someone who's guilty, that's another error. That's a type 2 error. If the null hypothesis is not rejected when the null hypothesis is actually false, type 2 error. So let me write error here. Type 1 error, type 2 error. So what we need to do is map this situation to our grid here and see what we come out with. So the population mean is 6. Is actually 6. So is the null hypothesis true or false? The null hypothesis says the population mean is 7, but it's actually 6. So the null hypothesis is false. We're here. The null hypothesis is false, and we do not reject the null hypothesis. And we do not reject the null hypothesis. So the null hypothesis is false, right? This is false. And we don't reject the null hypothesis. We've made a type 2 error. And that's our answer. It's a type 2 error. If the null hypothesis, if the true value was 7, which matched our null hypothesis, if the true value was 7, then the null hypothesis would be true, and we don't reject it, so that would be a correct decision. But as it stands, type 2 error.